Penn State football fans, Bob Flounders here. Special edition of the Blue White Breakdown podcast, Penn State football podcast. It is Tuesday, January 28th, as we put this one together, and I am just thrilled as always to welcome my man Doug Lesmerises for so many reasons. The host, his King of the North podcast, wildly popular. He does a great job focusing on the North. I don't want to bury the lead there. Not so much. It's not about Southern football. It's about Northern football. And he was right again by doing this because another Northern team took it home this year against Notre Dame. It was two Northern teams. Really,
yeah.
Three Northern teams could have won it. But Doug, also former Cleveland.com columnist, does great work. Patriot News intern. When I was there, he was there. Pennsylvania guy, Palmyra guy. We are here. Doug, thanks for doing the show. We're here specifically to talk about Penn State's latest defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, who you knew well and know well from your Ohio State days and your Kings of the North days. But welcome aboard. You look fabulous. I know you were down in Atlanta for the game. How are you doing, Doug?
Yeah, no, I'm just reveling in Northern supremacy, brother. So tremendous
you
year
were
for
right.
Penn State.
You saw the future, Doug. You saw the future, that the South was overrated and the North shall rise again, and they have.
So you're exactly right. I did see the future. So I don't want to brag about it. It's not about me. It's about us. It's about our Northern community of fans. I was certainly there at the semifinal, the Notre Dame Penn State semifinal. With you, I actually picked Penn State in that game. I had been I was at the Notre Dame Georgia quarterfinal. I was very enthused about the way Notre Dame was playing, but I kind of thought to myself, man, I just think Penn State has a couple more dudes. And then Penn State was up 10-0. And I was like, I nailed this one. Then it was like, but a great year for Penn State, a great year for the North. And, to have 5 of our Northern teams, make the Final Four in the last 2 years, right? I mean, to follow Michigan and Washington with Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, it's not going away, Bob. And you know this, but I was at the Ohio State celebration for their national championship on Sunday, and just talking about, I really think what Ohio State did sort of on the field and off the field, building a roster, planning a season to play your best at the end of the year. I was saying, I really do think it's a model of how to do this. And Michigan did a lot of the same things last year too. And somebody with Ohio State said to me, now Penn State's trying to do it. So it's I think we all see that, but why wouldn't that be next up? Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State in 2025, and Penn State fans know this, but it's everybody acknowledges it, that there is a way, I think, to go about this in the North, and Penn State very much seems to be on the right track and trying to be the next one up.
Yeah, Doug, I do think that the one fly in the ointment for Ohio State is I don't think their plan deliberately was to lose at home to Michigan to kind of get a galvanizing effect and then go on their big run. But other than that, though, I think you're right. I think a lot of us thought they were probably easily the most talented team. It would take some time to get some of the young players up to speed, the transfer players up to speed, and the quarterback up to speed. But when it happened, I don't know, Doug. Before we start talking about Jim Knowles and Penn State, I just remember seeing highlights of the second Ohio State Oregon game at the Rose Bowl. And I was like, whoa, that was when I knew that their best game was better than anybody else's. And if they'd played anything close to it, everyone else was playing for second.
Yeah, and I really think even it was the defensive side of the ball first. As exciting as Jeremiah Smith was, as well as Will Howard played in the playoff, that defensive performance, 34-0 before Oregon scored. But I thought the nothing, that's a really good. That's Dylan Gabriel, who's been around. That's Tez Johnson. I know Jordan James got hurt in that game, but the defense really came together. Again, we're talking about Jim Knowles. The defense really came together with a plan, with pressure up front, with guys, the way Jim Knowles was using Caleb Downs, one of the best defensive players in the country, like the level that defense played at the end of the year, it just felt like I don't know who's going to be able to get more than 20 on them. And so then your path to beating Ohio State is hopefully try to win 20-17. That's a hard way to win.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Doug, Penn State fans are pretty excited right now. For a lot of reasons, but yeah. So they had to replace Tom Allen shortly after their season ends. He goes to Clemson. I think it probably caught Penn State off guard a little bit. I don't think that was there was nothing. There was nothing there under the surface that, hey, it'd be great if you didn't come back. I thought he did a pretty solid job, but now they have Jim Knowles, right? And Penn State fans have watched the last two Penn State Ohio State games, and Ohio State's defense in both those games was the best unit on the field by a large margin. I know they have great athletes, but he is much like Andy Kotelnicki, an innovative coordinator. Will use all of his pieces very wisely. Surprisingly, great reputation. If you're a Penn State fan, you're checking the box, right? We took him away from Ohio State. Great at his job. Philadelphia guy. And we need somebody to run what's going to be yet another talented defense, even though they're missing Abdul Carter. But the Penn State fans are so excited. They still have some issues, but I wanted you to kind of just speak to what you know about Jim, what you think of the hire, and how you see this playing out. You've already talked about it. Penn State feels really good about their chances this year. It is a model that's been followed. Ohio State did it. Michigan did it. And one of the big pieces was getting a defensive coordinator in there that James can trust and knows what he's doing and is not afraid to experiment with all of Penn State's freakish athletes.
Yeah, so the most important thing, and it's the one thing I texted you as soon as this hire was official, was Jim Knowles loves to go down the shore. So he's an Ocean City guy. So I mean, there's a lot of people, right? Central Pennsylvania like that. He's one of your people. So if you're walking the boardwalk this summer, you might see him there. So get ready. He likes the boardwalk and cigars. One of the things is the way he's coming into Penn State is so different than the way he came into Ohio State. We like the Brian Fremeau index. The stats that we use a lot is a drive-to-drive index, offensively and defensively, of where you rank in the nation. By that metric, Penn State's defense the last 4 years has been 9th, 4th, 7th, and 4th. Yeah. So this is an excellent defense. Jim Knowles isn't coming in to fix anything. Right. And I think, we talked about this on Kings of the North yesterday, and there was sort of a discussion of like, well, is this really what Penn State needs? It's like you can see the things they want to get better at on offense. And I was saying, well, the thing that you can't do is let the defense drop off. Yeah. If Allar elevates, if the transfer receivers hit, you have all the offensive line guys back, you might have the best running back tandem in the country next year. Yeah. And then you can't say, oh, we no longer have a championship level defense. That would be awful. Right. So when Jim Knowles came to Ohio State, he came to fix a broken defense. Ohio State made the national championship game in 2020, but the defense wasn't good enough. And then in 2021, the coordinator got demoted in the middle of the year. You knew it wasn't going to work and there was going to be a change. They had a pretty bad by Ohio State standards defense for 3 out of 4 years there between 18 and 21. Yeah. And Ohio State said, we're going to go pay. He had no connections to Ohio State. And I think Penn State was in on the bidding when they hired Manny Diaz. Like everybody was like, oh, who needs a coordinator? This is the best guy out there. And Ohio State won the bidding war. So he came to solve a problem. Like Ohio State thought, we are not going to win a national championship playing the defense the way we're playing it. That's not where Penn State is. So I think there's a lot of energy around that. He doesn't have to come in whole hog. He certainly has a system, but it's not from desperation. It's not from a come save us. It's a come elevate us. Come get us over the top. We were in the Final Four. We want to win it all. Yeah. So Penn State is in such a better place compared to when he got to Ohio State. Because, one of the things at Ohio State, it took a little time. He has a very specific way of playing, and you could see it over the course of the year. Like the truncated version is the first year in 2022, you thought like, hey, this defense is pretty good. And then Ohio State got to the Michigan game, and I thought he over-blitzed. He took too many risks, and Michigan hit a bunch of big plays. Yep. And it was like, oh, this whole thing. Up until then, everybody was really happy with it. Yep. And he was too aggressive, and it burned him. Then in 2023, they reacted to that, which was good. And they played a lot of off coverage. They allowed stuff underneath. They were bend, don't break. But they were kind of letting people move down the field sometimes. That was like, well, this is good, but you're not making splash plays. You're not getting pressure. You're not getting sacks. You're just like maybe holding teams to field goals. It was almost like too aggressive year one, not aggressive enough year two. And then it all came together this year.
Yeah.
But still within that, they weren't happy with how they played defense against Oregon. Again, I'm kind of in the minority here. I didn't think it was the worst defensive performance of all time. Oregon's really good. It was on the road, but they gave up some big deep shots they didn't expect to. They didn't get any pressure on the quarterback. And so they made some adjustments after that game. And then the second half of this year was the most like, okay, this is what we're talking about. Now, a big part of that was Caleb Downs. That Jim Knowles found a really creative way to use him. But to your point, one of the transformative things, we called it was almost like he created a new position. Caleb Downs started playing like in a fourth level of the defense, right? Instead of defensive line linebacker secondary, it was like defensive line linebacker, Caleb Downs in between the linebackers and the secondary, and then the secondary.
Yeah.
We were like creating a new name for the position. But the bottom line of that is he had an incredibly talented, instinctual, intelligent film guy that he found a way to deploy in a creative way that made him even better than he was. He got him closer to the line of scrimmage. He messed up routes in the middle of the field in coverage. He got after guys on quick throws to the outside. He was awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what are you going to do with Penn State safeties? What are you going to do with Denai Dennis Sutton? What are you going to do with the talent that Penn State has? At the national championship game at Media Day, I was asking just a lot of the Ohio State guys about like Jim Knowles, like what's the deal? And it's the thing that media says, but then they were saying it. It's like it's the shorthand, it's the phrase, mad scientist, mad scientist, mad scientist, right? Jordan Hancock, really good nickel coverage guy, had started as a corner, really wound up playing a lot of deep safety this year, said he's a mad scientist. So that's what he is. And when you already have defensive talent on an already great defense, now he's just turning it up to 11 and getting in the lab. Woo, mama, that could be pretty good.
I just want to give you a shout out too, because you were on the Blue White Breakdown before Penn State played Ohio State in early November, and Penn State fans, I'm sure if you go back and look at it, Doug basically said, "Hey, there's a really good chance that the two best players on this Ohio State team are super duper young." And you were talking about Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs, and it wasn't a perfect performance in that game, but you could see the pieces. Ohio State on offense and defense in that game. If Will Howard plays a clean game. If he plays a clean game, I don't know that game was going to be very close. They still were, I think, clearly better at the end. Caleb Downs made some plays in that game that were very necessary. Jeremiah Smith just missed, I think, on a touchdown on a pass that might have been in the sun or whatever it was. They weren't quite there, but they were close. And you kind of sniffed it out very early that the young players on a team full of, stock veteran NFL caliber players that could have won in the draft. Those two young players, they're not winning anything without those two.
Now, they might have 15 guys drafted, but Caleb Downs, and I mean, I know I'm not an NFL draft guy. People say if Jeremiah Smith, as a true freshman, was eligible for the draft, he might go 1. And if Caleb Downs was eligible for the draft, I think he'd at least be in the top 15. So, yeah, they have Ohio State. They're going to have like only 3 starters back on defense, like 5 or 6 on offense, new quarterback, new running back tandem, new tackles, right? So there's going to be a lot of new stuff for Ohio State, but like those are 2 guys you want to start a team with for sure.
Yeah, Doug. So the departure from Ohio State, obviously Jim Knowles is going to get a lot of money. He's earned it. It's like $9.3 million over the next 3 years, averaged out. A lot of money for DC, but what was your take on how he left Ohio State? Did he see the writing on the wall? Were there some issues there? Was it just time for him to try something new? How did you look at it?
Yeah, so, this is one of those where everybody is kind of getting their side of the story out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have not talked to people inside the building who have given me like the scoop on that, but everybody's scoop is always their version of the scoop.
Right.
Anyway, so along the way, there had been a lot, and this is interesting, I think, for Penn State fans, just a lot of discussion at Ohio State about maybe what Jim Knowles wants to do on defense doesn't exactly match up with what Larry Johnson, the former Penn State defensive line coach, who's been at Ohio State for a decade now, has won 2 national championships at Ohio State. What he wants to do on defense, Jim Knowles really wants to be much more of a 3-man front with a float guy, like he calls it the jack position. I'm sure he'll probably rename it at Penn State, but it's like a stand-up end who moves around, and you really need to have a mind lock with Knowles to understand what you want to do. But then that's your fourth guy. Yeah. Larry Johnson wants to play 4 down linemen. Yeah. So that was always, Jim Knowles talked about this jack position for 3 years, and like we never got there. The time that we spent talking about this position that never happened was wild. So you wondered, like, oh, how much is like you bring in this guy to run his defense, but Larry Johnson is a legend and is a winner and is a technician and has his way of doing things. And it was always a little bit of like, I don't know if these things fit together, but they won the national championship. Right. But I don't think that would be a reason to leave. I do think from an Ohio State perspective, I just think, right, like, I call it failure. Like failure and money are the greatest motivators. Like we saw what motivated this Ohio State roster to stay? Failure. If they had won the national championship last year, they wouldn't have stayed to win it this year. Yeah. What motivated Michigan the year before? Losing to TCU. They didn't get where they wanted to go. So then you always you'll push it more when you haven't gotten there. So it's not that Ohio State maybe couldn't have gone to where Penn State went, but Penn State's more motivated to do so. So Ohio State got the word out that, hey, we were willing to make him the highest paid defensive coordinator in the country, but I think that threshold was beat Wink Martindale at 2.75. Well, Penn State's willing to go to 3.1, and Ohio State is like, well, if you give Jim Knowles a raise, what are you going to do with Chip Kelly? And then what are you going to do with Brian Hartline? I'm not saying they couldn't have done it. Right. I'm not saying that money is an issue, but they're just in a different spot. So if he's and then, Penn State made a big deal. He's coming home. He's coming home. He's a PA for the Commonwealth. Do it for the Commonwealth. I don't know. Is that a thing? But also he does seem like a guy who might be more motivated by trying to get somebody there for the first time rather than try to stick around and do it again. Right. So I don't know. I don't know that it has to. We were talking about on our show yesterday, like, does there have to be a bad guy? Did Ohio State screw this up? Did Jim Knowles screw this up? It's a business. Is this the first time that anybody realized college football is a business? Yeah. So I just think it could be like fine for Ohio State, fine for Knowles, and great for Penn State. So great. So I don't know why for sure. And again, like the defensive performance against Oregon wasn't quite good enough. You hear something like, did Ryan Day get after him a little bit? Like, this isn't good enough. It's like, okay, well, maybe he did. And I don't know. Did Jim Knowles not like that? Well, I don't know. It worked. The defense got better and they won the national championship. So what's the head coach? I said, like, you don't hang banners for retaining coordinators. The pregame speech is like, let's go out there and retain our coordinator. You're here to win. So they won. And then they lost their coordinator to another great program that paid more money. So November 1st is going to be a banger. Yeah. Penn State at Ohio State. That was going to be the case anyway. But he's going to get booed. I mean, like Ohio State's their feelings are hurt because everybody knows it's a business, but they don't want to be reminded that it's a business. And everybody thinks that you are a passionate fan and all the players and coaches care about it the exact same way you do. And it's like, you're a fan for 50 years. Your grandma made you a fan. Nobody cares about it more than you do. So then this is a reminder of that, but it's okay.
All right, we're talking with Doug Lesmerises, Kings of the North podcast. You guys got to check it out. If you didn't check it out by now, you guys are insane. Please check it out. He's also a former Cleveland.com columnist, a former Harrisburg Patriot News intern. He's from Pennsylvania. That's when I first got to know Doug, we're talking about Jim Knowles. I want to, before we let you leave too, I want to get your thoughts on some Penn State things. Yeah, for sure. But Doug, so Jim's a beach guy, a cigar guy. What was it like the times that you talked with him? How would you kind of describe him? What's the personality like? Can you shed a little light, maybe his demeanor? Like what struck you most about maybe interacting with him?
Gruff, idiosyncratic a little bit. Like I think everybody kind of says the same thing. It's sort of like, is this guy a football coach? It's not maybe like what you run into with a lot of people. But really, I always thought did a good job of saying like, if it doesn't work, it's my fault. Right. It's my responsibility to put players in the positions to succeed. Yeah. And so I thought, the players understood that that I don't know if he's, he might not give you a hug in the hallway, but I think players understand that he is locking himself in his office for 17 hours to try to put you in the best position to succeed. Yeah. And he's smart and he's creative and he is hyper-focused on that. And I don't know that I'm curious how Penn State will use him. There were some frustrations early, like by the end, he wasn't a position group coach anymore. For the first 2 years, he was a linebackers coach in addition to being the defensive coordinator. And they didn't get anybody in recruiting at linebacker. They were in on a kid in Louisiana who they were in the final three and USC got him. And it was sort of like Jim Knowles is not a recruiter. That is not he is. And so it was fine, but Ohio State got in a much better spot when they hired James Laurinaitis this year as the linebackers coach, and Knowles didn't have that responsibility anymore, and he can just coordinate and he can just scheme. So he's just that kind of guy. But I do think the players respect him, and if I want to go, I think sit in his office and kick back and talk ball. I think he would do that all day. But I am very curious to see what kind of recruiting responsibilities Penn State does or does not put on him, because it's not his forte. And it's sort of at some point, it's why not just let the guy do what he's best at, which is sit in his office and try to figure out a blitz nobody's ever tried before.
Yeah. And, you mentioned not really a position coach anymore. Penn State has their own version of Laurinaitis and Dan Connor, who really helped the defense this year, helped Tom Allen. He was on the field. Allen was in the booth, and he was the guy that was kind of in the, kind of communicating with Kobe King. And I think he's got a very bright future, great player, much like James. So there is a parallel, I think, there. But I do think it's interesting that a lot of Penn State fans, the chatter is, oh, he's really going to help recruiting. Well, you might want to go. It sounds like you might want to go play in his defense, but he's not.
Yes,
he's not the guy that's going to seal the deal.
I think people thought, so when Caleb Downs transferred from Alabama to Ohio State, there was some portion of Caleb Downs, I think, wanted to sit down with Jim Knowles and get a handle on the defense. Am I going to succeed in this defense? Do I believe in this defense? Is this a good scheme? He's coming from Nick Saban, right? Yeah. I mean, who's the best defensive mind of the last 50 years in college football? So it's and he passed the Caleb Downs test. So it's okay. So yeah, I do. Guys want to play for his defense, but if someone's going to go down and sit on mom's couch, but again, sitting on mom's couch is not really what recruiting's about anymore. You're just signing checks and NIL. So great, but let Jim Knowles do what he does best.
Yeah. So a little bit gruff, but he's a guy that's is not afraid to hole up for about 18 straight hours to come out with one of the most amazing blitzes or one of the better coverage alignments that the opponent's not going to be familiar with. I mean, I think Penn State's good with that. I'm real curious to see how it'll play out from that standpoint. The personnel he has, it's going to stink that they can't. If he had Abdul Carter, I mean, I would have loved to have seen what he would have done with Abdul as one of the better athletes to play at Penn State since I've been covering the team. He's just phenomenal. But they do have a lot of athletes at every position, Doug. But what I wanted to talk to you about was you were at the Orange Bowl. You were at the Penn State Ohio State game this year. Penn State's had some problems on offense in big games against good defenses. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on how far away is Penn State's, I guess, passing game from being what it needs to be, or does it need to be a big factor with that run game? But you lose Tyler Warren. You don't have a proven wideout you can trust, and it shows up. It has shown up. It showed up against Ohio State the last 2 years, showed up against Michigan 2 years ago at Beaver Stadium when they didn't have Jim Harbaugh, showed up against Notre Dame. It showed up big time against Notre Dame. They didn't even have a catch, the wideout. So it's great that they have a great defense. It's great that they have their best offensive line since Franklin's been there. Those running backs are legit. Drew has done some great things managing the game at the line of scrimmage. But when it comes to crunch time and making plays, Drew couldn't do it against Notre Dame. And I don't know how much blame goes on the receivers there and how much goes on him. But he needs to take a step forward, and they have to find some answers at receiver, because eventually, if they don't, I don't know how far they can go again next year, this fall.
Yeah, I think Georgia's a decent comp, right? That the first Georgia title, Stetson Bennett, was kind of more of a minus, like a guy they had to overcome than a guy who led them there. And then in year 2, like he led the drive down the field against Ohio State to get him in the lead and win the game. And I thought they were much more an offensive driven team in their second national title. And so like Allar does have to elevate. And this is the thing, I've been on the show with you. We've talked about, like, I always ask, like, can Drew Allar go win a game if he needs to? And then it was like the USC game was like, okay. Yeah, I think he can. And then he had the opportunity against Notre Dame. And then like the opportunity was gone before it even started. So that has to happen. I would imagine year 2 of Kotelnicki will be even better than year 1. I do think Kotelnicki and Knowles are going to get along great. Like a little bit like opposite. Like if you put them Kotelnicki is going to be poking Knowles, and Knowles is going to be like, oh, Andy, I can't believe it. And like it's just going to be
the odd couple. They're the odd couple.
It's going to be so good. So that should be better. And then I don't know, right? Who's the Troy transfer? Who's the Troy transfer?
They got the USC kid, and then they got the kid from Troy. And they're both. I get a little nervous about programs like Troy, and the kid had a big game against Iowa, but they really were excited about Dante Cephas a couple years ago. And I'm not. Everyone's different. I hope this kid can be that player. I know they really like the USC kid too, but Doug, I've seen like 3 good wideouts during Franklin's time. I'm not sure it's his fault. He inherited Chris Godwin. That was really an O'Brien recruit that James, was able to. I think he was a freshman in 2014, but I think O'Brien was the one that kind of got him, and James was able to keep him. But then it gets a little, you're talking about like KJ Hamler, you're talking about Jahan Dotson, and now they've kind of been able to finesse it with the tight ends. But I still think, and the tight ends have been phenomenal. And when James says, if you're not going to go to Penn State to play tight end, you're doing it wrong, because those guys are really good. They have a couple this year that are going to be good too. But at the end of the day, you need a wideout. You need a wideout, I think, to change the game in one play. I mean, Tyler Warren was a unicorn. He's not on the roster this year. They're going to have good tight ends. They're not going to have Tyler, but you need a Jeremiah Smith or somebody in the ballpark when things aren't going well to flip the field or just take over a game and do it in a variety of ways. Catch and run by somebody, run over somebody. And I'm a little bit, you talked about those Georgia teams and, that was a minus. But towards the end, they had Ladd McConkey, they had Pickens. And I don't see that with Penn State. I hope maybe this year, Andy and Drew, with the help of the running game, one of those transfer guys can step up. But I'm going to need to see it. And I do think as good as this team can be, they do have to answer that question.
And it's, like Tez Johnson went from Troy to Oregon. So it's like, Troy receiver, it's a magic size. So it can happen.
Yep.
Like it can happen. And if it happened at corner. So you're right. You're just looking for Kimber and Harris on the opposite side. So like, can it happen? And if you just get one guy, it just tilts the field. It changes everything. There's one more guy you got to hang a safety over. There's one more guy that opens everything else up for the rest of the team, which is what Warren did this year. So, it is remarkable that Penn State got as far. And listen, I mean, if I am not hung up at all on their path, they made the Final Four. Hang a Final Four banner. Like they made the Final Four, and they were down to the final 2 minutes to make the national championship game. So with a deficiency,
right? So
now imagine also one of the great one-arm performances in college football history. Again, people during that game is like, oh, he seems fine. It's like, he's not fine.
No,
he's just doing it with one arm.
Yeah.
He's like, you can see in warm-ups. He's one arm. He played on the same side of the line. Usually he moves around. It's like, no, I can only play on this side because half my body doesn't work.
Incredible.
But I'm okay. It's like my dog. Our dog just had one of its legs amputated. I'm going to change my dog's name to Abdul. Like, it's a one-arm player. It was amazing. So think about that. Think about how far they got.
Yeah.
With the hole in the roster. So again, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to find Jeremiah Smith. You don't have to find Tez Johnson. It just has to be like better than it was this year. Yeah. So if they do that, but you have to have an Allar elevation that, again, everybody listening and watching this is like, yeah, Doug, who's this guy coming in and say Drew Allar has to be better? It's like, that's everybody's, but it's there. It could happen. And I do think from the Knowles thing, like we always want everything to happen in year one with everything. And it's like, oh, they got this new thing. It's going to be perfect right away. And a lot of times it's not. And then in year two, you learn all the lessons. You're more comfortable with each other. And so I think that part of the equation, Drew Allar and Andy Koltelnicki, such a huge deal that Koltelnicki didn't leave after a year.
Yeah, it was.
Real opportunity there. Real opportunity to see it. And again, like who are we sure is going to be better? Right. Bryce Young's not coming back. Caleb Williams isn't coming back. Who are we sure is going to be a better quarterback than Drew Allar? Now, he's got to be the best version of himself, a version we haven't seen consistently yet. But I don't know that there's anybody that you would say like, oh, well, I mean, if Penn State played that team, their quarterback would absolutely outclass him for sure. So there's opportunity.
Yeah. So we'll talk. Yeah, I should mention that Kyron Hudson, USC, Devontae Ross from Troy are the wideouts that I think they have some high hopes for. There's a young receiver named Tyseer Denmark, who's got some. You could see in practice, and he's had some moments. They certainly have some athletes, but you just wonder about. Penn State fans are just they're at their wits' end with the wideout group, especially after the last 2 years. And the one thing Penn State, like Ohio State last year, they have going for it is they don't leave the state, I think, of Pennsylvania in September. They play some teams early that they should absolutely smash. But there's going to be there's always moments of truth. It happened to Ohio State this year. Penn State, they could have lost the USC game. They were in trouble at Wisconsin. They were in trouble at Minnesota. They're still gonna as good as the talent is. There's going to be some off weeks, and they're going to have to figure out some ways to win games because they're not just gonna. They're not there where they could just roll over teams. And I thought it was interesting watching Ohio State last year, knowing they're this talented group, but they're also a group that had a lot of moving parts and new parts at key spots, and they were not going to hit the ground running. There was going to be some time for all of it to start clicking. Kelly had to get on the same page, the quarterback had to get on the same page, Jeremiah Smith. And there were some games where they didn't look great, but Doug, to your point, once the playoffs started, even in that Tennessee game, it was pretty clear that they, first of all, they were pissed off. Second of all, they were all focused, and it was going to take a lot to stay with them for 60 minutes.
And the one thing Ryan Day said, it's just an interesting way to think about it. It's like he said they started at the end of the year and worked backwards, like in their preseason sort of planning of how to think about things. And so Ohio State at times under Ryan Day has been a team that'll go tempo. They played pretty slow this year. They had the two backs. And again, that's such a great comparison with Penn State. Ohio State got Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins both healthy to the end of the year, both healthy and fresh. And so they were doing some things where now they didn't play quite as many guys on defense as some teams did. Notre Dame practically rotated at 8 of their 11 defensive spots. Michigan did the same thing the year before. So you do have to, I think, have a strategy and a plan for how to play your best in the playoff and how to get there fresh and healthy. And if some of that means like a clunkers that you survive in September and October, I think we all have to get a little more accustomed to that, especially with the blue bloods. Because in the NFL, everything about college football is becoming more like the NFL. Good teams play clunkers in the NFL all the time. And it's like, oh, this team, I can't believe, and every NFL line's like 7, at the most, even if it's a great team and a bad team. And so there's going to be more of that you maybe the idea is not to dominate for the 12-game regular season. It's to make sure that, you are winning without maxing out so that you're ready to go in the playoff now. And so again, as you said, it's like Ohio State had a great plan the whole way, except the worst loss in 30 years to their rival that they can't lose, that it almost ended the season before it started. So if you take that out of the Ohio State, it's like almost all ascension, right? Yeah. So But the other thing is too, and it's hard for fans that I don't ever, if we act like rivalries don't matter, we're going to kill the sport.
Yeah.
So there's so many comparisons between Ohio State did not have to go through Michigan to win the national title. They could go around Michigan. And Penn State did not have to go through Ohio State to get to the Final Four. They go around Ohio State. Yeah. So as much as it's probably going to be a top 5 matchup on November 1st in Ohio Stadium between these two teams.
Yeah.
Like for the 3.5 hours, it should feel like everything. We do not want to diminish that. We're going to kill our sport if we diminish that. And I don't think the fans are ever going to let that happen.
Yeah.
But then like the next week, win or lose, we just have to remember like, okay, I'm not sure that any of your goals are dead because you didn't win that one. So it's an adjustment for all of us, but I certainly expect to see both Ohio State and Penn State back in the playoff next year.
Yeah, it's a nice little mulligan you can have if you take care of business in the games you're supposed to take care of. But when you expanded the format, that was, and I think that, why shouldn't there be a mulligan? Why should it be? I mean,
one.
Yeah,
right.
One
not
mulligan.
3 SEC, not 3.
Right, one.
But I call it the let them lose initiative, right? Let them lose.
Yeah.
Once, like one kind of iffy loss and maybe one loss to like, oh man, that was like it's Ohio State. 2-loss national champion. Won by 1 point on the road to the number 1 team. Literally about as good of a loss as you can have. And then one completely inexplicable, oh my God, shut down the program. So like 1.5 mulligans. Like I think like this is that Penn State loss. Penn State could have won as much as they could have gotten blown out. Penn State could have won that game with the 2 goal line stands. Like Penn State could have found a way to win that game. But it's not ruinous.
Yeah.
You still have a knot. You're a Penn State fan. You walk away from that. You have a knot in your stomach on Sunday. You're like, I can't believe it. Maybe even on Monday, but like by the next game, it's like it's the whole thing to me is heart versus head. It's like gut versus brain. Yeah. Let your gut and your heart feel it, but then like after 3 or 4 days, let your brain talk you into, you know what? It's not over for us.
Yeah. All right, Doug Lesmerises here on the Blue White Breakdown podcast. I got 2 more things for you before we go.
Oh, good.
Number 1. It's late January. If you were a Penn State fan, and I know you're not, I'm not either. We're here to just report on what we see and cover the team.
I mean, to be fair, I was at the airport in 82 when they landed. I'm just saying I was at the airport in 82 when they landed. Young Doug. I might have taken a family photo at JCPenney when I was 7 years old in a Penn State sweater. I probably could get that for you at some point. But
please do.
I'm an unbiased professional journalist.
Doug, in late January, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited should Penn State fans be about this season? And where, on the way too early, Kings of the North rankings of Northern teams? And let's not forget about obviously Ohio State, but Michigan, Oregon, all the teams, right? Notre Dame. Where do you see Penn State in that forest right now? It's January, but just give us a little taste.
Man,
what's in that big brain of yours?
I think I think they should be like a 9 or a 10 out of 10 in the excitement meter, because what else do you want? It's like the exact same thing as Michigan and Ohio State just did. Like you were close, you didn't quite get there, you brought back the heart of the team, and let's go do it again. Okay. The one thing is, as much as we talk about Drew Allar, if you think about like all the other teams in the Big Ten and in the North, Oregon, new QB.
Yep.
Notre Dame, new QB.
Yep.
Ohio State, new QB. Michigan, thank goodness, new QB. Right? Like Wisconsin, new QB. Iowa, new QB. Like there's going to be like Drew Allar. If we were going to do we have 28 Northern teams that we talk about, Avery Johnson's back at Kansas State, Rocco Becht is back at Iowa State. Those are our Northern teams. It's not things that really affect Penn State.
Yeah.
If we're doing like Big Ten rankings of quarterbacks right now, of course, Julian Sayin at Ohio State has great potential. Of course, Aiden Childs at Michigan State might make a leap, right? Like Fernando Mendoza from Indiana as a transfer from Cal has a lot of potential.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like nobody at the top has a guy who stayed at QB with the experience and resume and talent and upside of Drew Allar. So for everything Drew Allar is not yet, he's still like much more of a sure thing than what a lot of other good teams are going to be bringing back. And and I was with you guys, like, was not the whole Penn State discussion during the playoff, like, probably Singleton or Allen, not both.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the best. Right. It's the best backfield in the country. Like, I don't even know. Certainly this past year, there's a lot of discussions. All the best teams seem like they have two now, but there's nobody better. They have the best backfield in the country. Okay. And the offensive line, as you said, there is a lot to work with.
Yeah.
And we did this on the offseason last year. We'll probably do it this year, like best coordinator combos.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one.
I mean, right? What else? Who's better? Who's a better coordinator combo than these two guys?
Yeah.
So as much as the receivers are there, it really is elevation from Allar and elevation from James Franklin.
Yeah.
Right?
You're right.
James Franklin also has to do something he's never done. And I do think sometimes, like, people are too hard on James Franklin because, again, like, let's run through that. Nebraska would kill to be Penn State. And once upon a time, they were very comparable traditional blue bloods with great longtime coaches. Nebraska would kill for the James Franklin tenure.
Yeah.
So, okay, I get it.
Right.
Penn State's not Ohio State. I get it. Like, who's Ohio State? Not many people are Ohio State. Mm-hmm. And by the way, there's no longer a road block. It's a speed bump, but it's no longer a road block. So I just don't know what else Penn State fans would want. And please, 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 let us not allow talent, experience, resource investment to become pressure instead of opportunity.
Yeah.
I fought against it last offseason with Ohio State. They had players themselves say natty or bust. Now they nattied, so they did it. I think it felt like a burden to them too often. But you can't control what happens inside the building. For Penn State fans, this is incredible opportunity. There is a fantastic offseason and then season-long journey ahead of you. Do not start Penn State conversations with, well, if they don't, this cannot be an if they don't season. It has to be if they do. Because why do we have to start everything from a negative place? So if they do, because they have the chance. They have a chance to do it as much as anybody in the country. I don't think that Bama's not in a better spot. Georgia's not in a better spot. Ohio State's not in a better spot. I'm not saying Penn State's above them, but they're as good of a spot right now as anybody in the country. Please embrace that and enjoy that. And don't make yourself sick thinking about what if James Franklin loses a big game in the playoff. Like, that's no way to live.
Yeah. Doug, just real quick, have you ever thought about being a motivational speaker?
Yes.
I think I'm dead serious. You got me pretty pumped up about that. Not that I was thinking. I'm thinking along the same lines, but I was not as enthusiastic about it. But I think you paint a pretty accurate picture of what it should look like for the fan base. And I think knowing James Franklin, that's how he's going to probably approach it this year with his team. He does have two really good coordinators now with Jim Knowles on board. Doug, last thing. Anything new or anything Penn State fans who want to and continue to follow the Kings of the North podcast, anything new and exciting brewing on the KOTHNP Kings of the North podcast? Anything? I just butchered it. Anything new brewing on that front?
Yeah. So we're still doing 4 this week. We went through all the we did a lot on Knowles. On the Monday show, we went through all the coordinator moves in the North in the offseason. We're going to do performance reviews on all 28 of our Northern teams where we sit down like you have your boss talking to you in your office and like assign a rating to everybody. How did your season go? What was the thing you did best? What was the thing you did worst? What's the thing you can improve on? What's your overall rating of yourself, right? We're going to do that. The last 3 shows of this week, Penn State will certainly be included on that. And then I think next Monday, we have not yet done it. We like to let the season play out. We're going to do our All North team.
Great idea.
I would look for Abdul Carter on that. I would look for Ty Warren on that. We will award our King of the North. It's the Northern Heisman, which again, I think the Heisman should be awarded after the season, the full season. The idea that like we have a 12-game regular season and then we do this for 6 more games, 4 more games and don't acknowledge it. We will talk about that. And then we'll very quickly, I'm very interested in roster building. So we will double check on like who managed transfers and were helped by them the most this past season and who has what coming back. Because I do think the main thing, Bob, that we need to all do a better job. Like everybody was recruiting ratings was a shorthand for all of us in this industry for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
But that's not really what it's about anymore. So we talk about recruiting. We talk about portal in, who'd you sign. We talk about portal out, who'd you lose. And we talk about guys going to the NFL, but like retention. So we're trying to figure out a way to have like a retention metric of who are the guys that you kept that could have gone. It's hard to figure out, but we want to talk about like what really matters, because again, on the Michigan, Ohio State, and then what Penn State's doing now model, retention is way up there on how you win. So we're going to talk a lot about in the offseason roster building, who's doing it, who's being strategic, who's really in the best position to succeed. Because I think too much, it's one of those things in the portals, like, oh, they lost 17 guys in the portals. Like, they're all third stringers. They were all guys who figured out they were never going to contribute here. What does it matter? So you might have 6 in, 17 out. It's like, oh man, the portal. It's like, yeah, but you added 6 guys who are going to help you. You lost 17 guys who are never going to play here. We have to be smarter about it. So we're going to work on that.
Yeah, Doug, I think I'm probably going to try and steal at least 7 or 8 of those ideas, because they're all fantastic. My only other question, Doug, is who is going to performance review you?
No, my wife. It's not going to be good. She's downstairs every day listening to this. She has a very good handle on what it is I do, and I am not looking forward to that meeting.
Doug Lesmerises, Kings of the North podcast, former Harrisburg Patriot News intern on the sports side. Thank you so much. Look forward to all your stuff this year.
The North has risen, Bob. The North has risen.